G'day guys, and today I want to share with you all something that I've just purchased within the last week or so. Now, talking about my personal life isn't something I tend to do on the channel because I tend to focus more and place more value on talking about ideas rather than specific events or specific people, including myself and things I get up to. But sometimes I think it's valuable to draw sort of inspiration from what I'm doing or what I've done wrong, what I'm attempting to do, and extrapolate a general idea, a general principle, or something like that, and attempt to spread it to the rest of the world. So let's get right to it. I've purchased myself in a bit of an impulsive moment because it was on sale, a AncestryDNA kit. And obviously this is what you do, you spit in the jar or whatever, you send it off and they determine your ethnicity. Now, as far as I'm aware, I'm of Scottish stock with a potential bit of Viking based on my last name with a suffix of son, which is indicative of Nordic descent. But beyond that, I really don't know. I know one member of my family on my father's side has some sort of historical record going back maybe 100 years, but beyond that, I really don't know what my ethnicity is, where I've come from, and what essentially my ancestry is. Now, this has always been something that's been at least novel to me, but it's picked up new interest for me lately because I've been assembling myself a little list of things that I want to complete in order to gain greater knowledge about myself. So these are things such as testosterone levels. I want to get that checked out to make sure I'm nice and healthy. I want to do the Big 5 personality test, even though I'm pretty sure I know where I'll sit on that. It's good to know for certain rather than just what I can guess in my own amateur way. So these are things that I want to gather. This is information I want to gather about myself in order to gain a better understanding of myself. Because I was thinking recently, I was rereading The Art of War, and there's one little bit in there that essentially says, you're probably aware of it, know thy enemy, know thyself, and victory is never in doubt, not in 100 battles. Now this is really nice and short and concise, which is probably why everyone knows it, or is so familiar with it, but it's actually a vastly complicated statement because knowing yourself is a very complex task, as I've experienced quite painfully this year. Again, that's my personal life, we won't get into that, but I'm sure we're all aware, again extrapolating the general idea, that if we don't know ourselves, our own limitations, our own abilities, it can be quite difficult to engage in a successful life, because if we're not aware of certain character flaws, of certain predispositions we have, then we're going to go out floundering in our personal lives and we're going to run into calamity, as I certainly have this year. So thinking on that quote, if I want to have victory within my life, never in doubt, within 100 battles, well, obviously I need to know myself and I need to work out where I'm coming from, both as an individual, my family background, things that could have affected me in my childhood, but also in a genetic sense, because as we know, personality, predispositions, genetic conditions, these all come from your genes, obviously. So, for example, say hyperbolically, I'm a purebred Scottish, and it has always been that way for thousands of years, I might have a predisposition towards alcoholism. And things like that is just something I want to keep in mind so I can go about prosecuting my life in a way that's going to bring out, obviously victory for myself. So that's the point of this exercise, gaining more information about myself, where I'm coming from, and obviously using that to my advantage. Because if I have no knowledge, well, I'm going to be in a bad place. Imagine going into an exam with no knowledge. Imagine going into a professional sport with no knowledge. Imagine going into your job with no knowledge. It'd be dangerous. It could be dangerous depending on the application. And again, if I don't know myself and I'm trying to go out into the world with myself, because you're eternally stuck with yourself and trying to prosecute a good life, and I don't even have the knowledge of myself, well then I'm in big trouble. So the Ancestry kit, as I mentioned before, is the first part in what I'm going to do. There's going to be obviously a few other things which I hope to share on the channel, regardless of how unexpected and confronting they may be. For example, my ancestry could turn out to be something completely different to what I expected, and the family name I've inherited is more recent and that sort of thing. And this will actually be quite interesting because I consider myself, from a blood perspective, to be Scottish, and I know a little bit about Scottish history. Basically, the too long didn't read version is the Scottish people were used as whipping boys by the English. It's not very pleasant Scottish history. Lots of blood and suffering. Yeah, not good. Anyway, but if it turns out to be something completely different, then this might be confronting to me, because it's like, what if I'm German or Polish or Russian or something like that, and I have no real connection to any of these groups, or even something way more esoteric, like a large proportion could be Arabic or African. Even though I don't look that way, you can't see me, but I do not resemble a sub-Saharan African. That could be quite confronting, because it's like, do I now have to care about the history of these people? Because obviously I want to justify the suffering of my ancestors, because they are they worked quite hard and they endured unimaginable hardship to get me where I am today, it would be somewhat rude to completely ignore the suffering they undertook. It would be respectful, I feel, to learn about that history, but I don't feel any connection towards Arabic history, African history, Russian history, or anything like that beyond like a passing interest, like, ooh, that is interesting. Whereas I feel a much deeper connection to, say, Australian history and Scottish history because Australia is where I live, I consider myself Australian, and Scottish is obviously my immediate background and where my extended family lives. So yes, an interesting little thing I'm undertaking here. I won't be getting the result back till next year. It says 6 to 8 week turnaround. I get an email, we'll have a look, and then I'll share with you all here. But again, it's not just about these results. It's not just about this purchase I've made. It's this greater idea of undertaking a journey of self-knowledge, of knowing who you are, where you're coming from, both from an individual and a group perspective, so that we can better prosecute our campaign of life. Because again, if we're coming from a position of limited or complete absence of knowledge, we're not going to be able to win our victories, because we need to have knowledge of ourselves in order to understand, how we're going to go about things, how we're going to respond to things, how best to curb our worst excesses and bring out the best within ourselves, and that sort of thing. And that's what I want to undertake with this AncestryDNA kit, as well as some other things. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.